everyone. It is a week before Labor Day, a week before Labor Day weekend. And for me and mine, all those closest to me, that means the weekend of Dragon Con is right around the corner. So my heart is beating more quickly with each day that passes. So I wanted to take the time to make another in my series on good representation. So, for this one, I want to start out by highlighting a bit of a double standard that I've been noticing for a while now. Now, when Disney or another studio, but these days, at least for American animation, it's mostly Disney, makes a movie with a female protagonist, there's all kinds of concern about whether or not boys are going to want to watch it. In fact, the failure at the box office or disappointing reception at the box office of The Princess and the Frog, the studio blamed that on the title and on the fact that boys were put off by the word princess. So, in order to have a real box office success, they would have to emphasize male characters even in movies with female leads. That's how we got Tangled instead of Rapunzel, which it was originally going to be, and a heavy emphasis in the marketing on the character of Flynn Rider. Now, that movie was great. Later on, Frozen, female protagonist. Actually, female protagonists in that one, since there were two of them. But a lot of the marketing revolved around Olaf the Snowman, a male side character whom they thought little boys might find funny and worth identifying with, so, get them in the theater. Then later on, of course, you had Moana and the character of Maui being heavily featured in the marketing. And then, actually, one movie before that, Zootopia, which is actually a dual protagonist movie in a lot of ways. Judy Hopps being our main protagonist, but Nick Wilde being less a supporting player than a co-protagonist with his own arc. All of these are great movies, and all of these male characters that I'm highlighting are interesting male characters with whom little boys in the audience might identify. They might relate to that character or latch onto that character as being the most interesting or the funniest. And that's all good. But now I want to read you a list of animated films going all the way back to the end of Walt Disney's life. The Sword and the Stone, The Jungle Book, the feature films involving Winnie the Pooh, The Fox and the Hound, The Emperor's New Groove, Brother Bear, Meet the Robinsons, Coco, Onward, Ron's Gone Wrong, Ice Age, Paranorman, The Fantastic Mr. Fox, Minions, Barnyard, Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio. Think about the titles I've just read for you and tell me if you can think, if you've seen these movies, tell me if you can think of a single female character in these movies that a little girl in the audience might say, that's me. Or if not, that's me, that's who I want to be. This is a character I like. She's fun. She's interesting. Can you think of one? Now, my point is not that these movies are bad. Some of them are bad. Yes, Minions and Barnyard are bad. And some of them are quite good. I loved Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio, for instance. And I find the Jungle Book to be a lot of fun. But you can't help noticing. Think about the way that um, the studios approach movies with female protagonists. Got to get the boy in there. Got to make sure there's a boy around, or at least one boy. Usually there are more. Whereas when the protagonist is male, for some reason they don't feel like they're under the same obligation to do this for girls. And that's disappointing. I have, thankfully, not seen as much of that in the films I've noticed over the last couple of years. I think Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio was the last one that I really noticed that was like this, where every single interesting character was male, or at least every single interesting character that a girl might want to see herself in. Those were all male because girls, it's assumed, can identify just fine with male characters. They can sympathize with male protagonists in their journey, whereas the same is not expected of boys. So, what does that have to do with good representation, part 4? Well, I wanted to highlight some good female characters, or some of my favorite female characters in animated films with male protagonists. Because, yes, they do exist. There are some very interesting and rewarding side characters in movies that focus on a male lead, where the girls in the audience, my inner 12-year-old me, might look and say, yeah, I like that character. She's funny. She's interesting. So this will probably take more than one video, considering how short I have to make my videos and how many of these types there are, because I think most, at least since the rise of Pixar, the 1990s through today, I think most movies that do have male protagonists do have at least one interesting female character in the mix, which is a good thing. So let me talk about some of my favorites. I'll just start with a few, and then in the next video I'll go on with more. Again, there are a lot of these. Start with Pixar, because Pixar is pretty much the king of this. Yes, it did take them a while to come up with a movie with a female protagonist, but that didn't mean that the female characters prior to that were any slouch. My favorite is probably Eve from WALL-E. And the reason that I like her and find her interesting is that if you squint, you can imagine her as a kind of co-protagonist or deuteragonist, in that, yes, we meet WALL-E first. It's established with that first sequence in the movie that he is the lead. He's the character whose quest for love we're going to be following. But if you notice, WALL-E doesn't really change much throughout the film in terms of his heart, his character, his priorities, his goals. He's essentially the same lovable little guy at the end of the movie as he was at the beginning, the only difference being that now he's found love, and after a tense moment at the end when there's doubt, he gets to keep it. Eve, however, actually has an arc to go through. She begins the movie with a very straightforward prime directive. This is my job. This is what I was programmed to do. This is what I'm going to do. And then, as she has to help, WALL-E has followed her onto the Axiom, the amazing spaceship, and she actually ends up having to protect him. And at one point, she even saves his life. But she, like every other character that WALL-E bumps into, she changes as a result of her interaction with him. And she plays as big a role in saving the day at the climax as he does. She's right in there with him. And so let's give some appreciation to our beautiful, sleek blue and white lady robot here. I love her character. Another one I'm fond of, and this will not be all that much of a surprise, is Dory from Finding Nemo. In fact, this character was so popular with audiences that when the studio Pixar got around to making a sequel, they made it all about her. The sequel is not as good, but in the first film, what I love about Dory can be summed up in two words. She's funny. I love when female characters, side characters, leads, what have you, I love when female characters are allowed to be funny, when they are allowed to be weird. And she is essentially the funniest character in the film. So, gotta love her just for breaking the humor glass ceiling there that had been in place for a while. It's hard to think of a funny female character from the classic age, the golden age of animation, who wasn't a villain. Yes, Maleficent gets some of the funniest lines in Sleeping Beauty. And you also have characters like Witch Hazel in the Looney Tunes cartoons. But to be a good gal and to be funny was something we didn't often see. And so that's why I've got to raise a metaphorical glass to my girl Dory for being such a funny supporting character. Another one, or actually, this one I really love. This character, Violet from The Incredibles. And she's also great in The Incredibles too, but I want to focus primarily on the first film because Violet probably changes more than any other character in the movie. She begins her story as an intensely shy teenager, and her power, which is, or one of her powers, she has two powers: to create force fields and to turn invisible. And both of those are kind of defensive powers: to be invisible, to hide, to create force fields, to hold people off. And as the movie goes on, she starts to learn more and more about, first of all, the family dynamic that she's caught in, and how these powers, rather than being something that she's burdened with, can be a part of her. And I just loved seeing a shy, awkward, introverted teenage girl come into her badassery. She's not the protagonist, although she does save her family and members of her family at crucial moments, even delivering the final blow against evil, against syndrome, if you will, saving the lives of her family with the use of a force field. But the movie really does belong mostly to her father, Bob, and the co-protagonist, we could say, is her mother, Helen. So Violet is just a very richly drawn, supporting female character. But I just love her because she's just so weird and she doesn't know what to do about it. She hasn't really learned how to love herself. And that's the main thing that she learns by the end of the movie. She's learned to love herself, to accept herself. So those are just a few. There are more, but that's all I have time to talk about today. And I will see you next time. Those going to Dragon Con, it's gonna be awesome.